So welcome if you're joining us. This is the regular Research to Practice monthly webinar series that we host here at the Injury and Violence Prevention Center at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. Today is, or this month is a special month. We're holding a seminar that we've never had before, but we hope becomes a regular thing. We recently launched a student research grant program that's open to all injury prevention research students in the region. And we have our inaugural class of recipients presenting to us today. We'll have 3 sets of presentations. And so thank you for joining us. I expect a few more people will join. If you've come to our seminars before, in the past, we've used a webinar setup and we've opted more for a meeting format. So if you do have questions after a presentation, you will be able to unmute and put on your camera to ask your question and actually interact a little bit. So that's different from prior seminars. And with that, I'll turn it over to Emmy to do, Dr. Emmy Betts to do introductions.
Great, thanks, Ashley. So I'm Emmy Betts. I'm the Deputy Director of the Injury and Violence Prevention Center here on campus, and I'm so excited for today. A couple of additional logistics. So this session is being recorded. We'll send out the video link to everyone, and you can find it and past webinars online, and we'll put the link in the chat box. Please put questions you have along the way in the chat box, or you can wait. We'll have some Q&A after each presentation. And then please mark your calendar for our next webinar, which will be June 14th at noon Mountain Time. And it'll be on human trafficking in Colorado, force, fraud, and coercion in Latinx communities. So now I'm so excited that I get to introduce our speakers today. As Ashley mentioned, twice a year, the Injury Center has a call for student research grant applications. This year's call is actually still open with the deadline of May 31st, so please encourage your students to apply. The student awards were created to attract and support students pursuing research and evaluation projects in the field of injury and violence prevention. And the winners of grants in the fall of 2021 were Alin Badillo-Carrillo, Ligia Batista Silverman, and Samira Andani, and we're going to hear from all of them today. I'm going to introduce each one before they speak. So to start, Alin Badillo-Carrillo is pursuing a dual master's in public health and Latin American studies at the University of New Mexico. Her award was intended to support an analysis exploring the association between intimate partner homicide-suicides and the perpetrators' mental and behavioral health in the US. Upon graduation, Ms. Badillo-Carrillo hopes to create equitable intervention programs in communities of color and eventually obtain a PhD in a health-related field. Her mentors are Laura Tomedi and Teresa Cruz at the University of New Mexico. And with that, I will turn it over to Alin.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to quickly share my screen and let me know if you are able to see it.
Looks good. Or we can see your desktop.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. As the introductor said, I am presenting on intimate partner homicide-suicides and the perpetrators' behavioral and mental health status. And just before I quickly dive deeper into my study, I just want to share a brief background of what I'll be discussing. We'll start with some terminology so we can have common terms to understand. Talk a little bit about the background, the problem, and the purpose of the study, as well as share my framework, the methodology that I used, and the results, of course, and the strengths and limitations of the study and my next steps. And hopefully, if we have time for discussion, then I'll talk a little bit about the implications and the discussions of how it differed with other previous studies. Just some common terminology. So these definitions are from the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control, or the CDC. Intimate partner violence is immediate or ongoing conflict of violence between current or a former partner, spouses, or dating partners. And that is different than homicide-suicides in the sense that it is a single or multiple homicides followed by suicide of the perpetrator within 24 hours of the murder. And going a little bit deeper into the whole phenomenon, then there is intimate partner homicide-suicide, where a partner who is current or former kills their partner or other individuals in the process and then commits suicide within the 24 hours. And there is other names for this, which is murder-suicide. So just know that I will be using them intermittently. And just a little bit of the background. So one of the reasons why I chose this is because intimate partner violence is one of the leading causes of death for many adolescents and young adults in parts of the world. And almost within the realm of intimate partner violence, most of the perpetrators are males and most of the victims are females. And there is one gap, though, that it's still quite not sure within the realm of research, and that is the perpetrators' mental and behavioral health when committing homicide and then suicide. And so the literature on homicide-suicide has actually focused before, like on adolescents, suicides themselves, military members, the age, firearms, but murder-suicides concerning intimate partner violence is not well documented. And so one of the initial objects was to understand the association between intimate partner homicide-suicides and the perpetrator's mental and behavioral health. And the initial idea was to do it by an analysis by region, so like Northeast, Southwest, Midwest, but the amount of incidents of homicide, suicide, and intimate partner homicide suicides were too small to separate. Therefore, I just ended up doing an entire analysis to better protect the individuals who are in those areas. And my hypothesis was that individuals are more likely to have been diagnosed with mental health illness or tested positive for alcohol or other drugs in terms of the perpetrators. And I am using the National Violent Death Reporting System, which is the only database in the nation reporting violent deaths. And they have over 600 variables that they report from coronary, law enforcement, and family and relatives. And it is currently, as of 2019, they use all of the 50 states. While trying to conceptualize intimate partner homicide suicides, I realized that there isn't really like a framework that is being used. And so while looking at this, I actually had to combine two different networks, frameworks, in order to create my understanding of this. And I used, the first one was from Masur Tardif in 1992, which they really look at the epidemiological identifications of homicide suicide themselves. And they give a lot of the risk factors at many different levels. And I combined that with Hirsch's revised socio-ecological model of the 1992 for intimate partner violence to really emphasize that intimate partner homicide suicide is a gendered risk factor at a societal, community, individual, and relationship level. And just some examples of risk factors at a gender societal level can include discrimination, lack of violence, lack of supporting for violence against women, and preventions for violence. And examples for gendered community risk factors includes affordable mental and behavioral treatments, firearm policies, and no to poor intimate partner violence services. Examples of risk factors at a gendered individual level include legal problems, current death of families, unstable housing, and some of the factors for gendered relationship levels. It can include altercations, jealousy, and separation. And we can come back and discuss a little bit more of each framework separately if we can, and hopefully have the time. Moving on to what I did actually to analyze the data. So I did an exploratory analysis of the National Violent Death Reporting System from 2013 to 2019. And I followed McNally et al. He conducted a research and wrote a paper on mining for murder-suicide and approach to identifying cases for murder-suicide in the National Violent Death Reporting System. And so I followed his steps to identify homicide-suicides. And so the initial exploration, there was over 222,235 incidents of violent deaths. And the first step was restricting that to homicide-suicides, which they made only 2.4% of the violent deaths. And after that, I moved on to restricting further in the univariate analysis by dropping variables that were less than 50 observations within homicide-suicides. And then the step 3, which was a little bit more difficult, was identifying intimate partner homicide-suicides. And then after that, I did a bivariate analysis to figure out the association between intimate partner homicide-suicides compared to not intimate partner homicide-suicides, and the mental health and the behavioral health of perpetrators. And so that is what I did. And I did exclude individuals who did not, or variables that did not include missing, or let me repeat that. I excluded variables that were missing or unknown. And so I do want to say that when I share my results, they are my findings and my conclusions. It doesn't necessarily represent the findings from the CDC or any of the participating states. And I do want to start by sharing the results in demographics. And here I'll show that in intimate partner homicide-suicides and incidents where intimate partner violence involved by either the law enforcement or the medical center, intimate partner homicide-suicides were more likely to be non-Hispanic whites compared to non-intimate partner homicide-suicide incidents. And within that same intimate partner homicide-suicide, they were also more likely to have a high school degree and less likely to have a professional degree when we compare them to non-intimate partner homicide-suicides. And there were missing variables that, once again, I can discuss further in the end. In regards to the incidents themselves, the majority of intimate partner homicide-suicides and just homicide-suicide incidents in general did occur in the perpetrator's home or apartment. And in incidents that involved intimate partner homicide-suicides, were also less likely to have had, or were less likely to have had legal problems contribute to the event compared to non-intimate partner homicide-suicides. And they were also more likely to have had previous violent crimes. And in that, it is also being compared to non-intimate partner homicide-suicides. And because all of these are compared to non-intimate partner homicide-suicides, I'm just going to be stating the results and then not just reiterating that compared to non-intimate partner homicide-suicides. Within the mental health and just homicide-suicides by themselves, we found that 1 in 5 perpetrators had documented a mental health issue. And when we were looking at mental health issues, the factors that were associated were depression, anxiety, or not the ones that they were associated, but the ones we looked at was depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, all at the time of death. And the perpetrators, 1 in 7 had a history of suicidal thought, and 1 in 10 had actually had a history of behavioral health treatment. But when looking at it for intimate partner homicide-suicides, none of the indicators differed between perpetrators of intimate partner homicide-suicide and those of non-intimate partner homicide-suicides. However, we did find associations within the toxicology report, and we found that perpetrators of intimate partner homicide-suicide events were more likely to have tested positive for alcohol, marijuana, opioids, and in addition to that, like for example, alcohol, it was the most common used drug at the time of the death. And then after that, it was marijuana. And then after that, it was opioids. And for at the time of the death, about 50% of the perpetrators were more likely to have used alcohol. And other toxicants that were associated was cocaine, but the numbers were too small to report. And with all studies, there is some limitations, and one of them is that the findings are not nationally representative. And because, and I want to describe a little bit for that, and it's because, so I looked at from 2013 to 2015, but there were some states that did not participate through all of the years, so it's not quite nationally representative. And when getting the data and when inputting the data from state into the database, it's not really guaranteed that the data is consistent. So there is a lot of reporting, there's a lot of missing variables that are not being recorded. And I do want to make some emphasis about the strengths of the study, because one, it is a large population size. It is a 7-year data set, and it's using the 50 states from various different sources. And this is the only state-based surveillance system that we have for violent deaths. And like I said before, it has over 600 unique data elements that one could explore, which is very, it's very good and it's very rare to have. And so my next steps is to do a multivariate analysis to investigate more of the confounders and more of the moderate variables. And so I do want to thank my mentors, Dr. Teresa Cruz and Dr. Tomati, for guiding me through this entire process. It was a little bit scary at first, but I feel very blessed to have both of these amazing ladies by my side. And I also want to thank the Injury and Violence Prevention for definitely for contributing financially to this research. It means a lot to me, and of course the CDC for providing the data set. And I want to thank you to all from the bottom of my heart. Thank you very much for making this possible. And I think I am out of time, if that is right.
Yep, that's right. Alin, that timing was perfect, and congratulations.
Perfect.
On a really
you.
interesting study. I think we have time for one question before we move on. Does anyone have a question?
And I can go back. I'm going to keep it on in case anyone wants to go back and share these, because I know it was a lot covered.
Oh, I think Dr. Brooks Russell has a question.
Yeah.
I have two, so I'll just try to pick one. I guess, so there's so many findings here, and some of them were significant, but you pointed out some places where there was not significant differences, and maybe, you know, some of the differences weren't very large. Were you surprised by that? Did you expect, you know, kind of bigger differences, or does it kind of speak to how much is shared across these events despite the presence or absence of partner?
Yeah, I honestly, I had no idea what I was gonna find. And the reason for that is that, one, there's not a whole lot of research found on the perpetrators' mental and behavioral health, which was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this project, to understand a little bit. But like the other researchers, they were very mixed findings. I found studies that said that depression was an associated factor, and then some that were saying as depression was not an associated factor. So within the literature review, it was very mixed findings. So I really did not know what I was gonna find, and I was really curious to see, but I'm not surprised that it's like findings are mixed too. Which actually only speaks to the need to continuing to do the studies.
Exactly. Spoken like a researcher already.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And we may have more questions at the end if there's time. So let's move on to our next student, Ligia Silverman. Ms. Ligia Batista Silverman is pursuing an MD at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Her award was intended to support a project to describe the variability and yield of occult injury testing in well-appearing contacts of children who have a subspecialty evaluation for suspected child abuse. She is a professional research assistant here in our emergency department, as well as in child abuse pediatrics, where she's worked on a variety of research projects, and she aims to become a leader in clinical and scholarly work. And she's mentored by Dan Lindberg, also of University of Colorado School of Medicine. And Ligia, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Makes me feel very important. I'm wondering if you need to, if you are able to see my screen.
Yeah.
This way. Are you able to see it? Okay, I am wondering if you would like to have my face here because I'm in the library and the Wi-Fi is not very reliable. So I will keep it on, but if you have any problems with connection, you just let me know.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. So I am so grateful for the opportunity to present today. I'm going to talk about my work with Dr. Lindberg on the topic of child abuse. And so knowing that, just feel free to leave the presentation if you have to, and take care of your heart in whatever way you have to. And thank you for being here. Okay, so I would like to first introduce myself. I am a medical student here on campus. And as the introduction mentioned, I aim to become a child abuse pediatrics clinician and researcher. And I'm so grateful to be on this campus and to have worked with the Camp Center and Dr. Lindberg. I actually started working at Children's Hospital in 2015 as an intern. I started in neurosurgery, and through becoming part of a project in traumatic brain injury, I then learned about the field of child abuse and became fascinated. And now that I'm in medical school, I'm advised to keep my mind and options open, but my ultimate goal is to become a child abuse pediatrician and work on my research. At the present moment, I am not working as a professional research assistant because I'm full-time in school in our very new curriculum that is very demanding. And so I'm also so grateful for this grant because it has given me the incredible opportunity to have this role as an investigator independently under the right guidance and mentorship. So first of all, in the topic of child abuse, I think it's really important to discuss family violence first and foremost. And I would like to share this with you. Violence is a contagious disease. It meets the definitions of a disease and of being contagious. So my focus is on family violence as a field that generally includes concepts of intimate partner violence, elder and animal maltreatment, and until recently, these topics have been studied in siloed ways as their own subspecialties. And our campus is actually a national leader advocating that we reframe this approach to violence so that we focus on it as more like secondhand smoke. So as a disease that is unlikely to affect not just the smoker, but the people around them. So the same way that we look at secondhand smoke in a household, I urge you to consider thinking of violence as this idea of secondhand toxicity that has pervasive effects for all family members. And why is this important? Violence and how it permeates through my interest in child abuse means to confirm the presence of abuse early on. So research has focused on these different types of violence, but what I want to bring to your attention is how our research works on filling the gap around siblings and contacts of children who are evaluated and come to us due to child abuse concerns. And this is especially important in children because it can be a big deal to protect kiddos from future harm. And we also know that adverse childhood events increase the risk of impacting children's lives in adulthood, their employment, financial status, health, just to name a few. And according to research, 20 to 33% of the most serious forms of physical abuse are missed on at least one healthcare visit. And this puts children at increased risk of subsequent injury or death. And this is why it is so important for me and for the group that I work with to prevent escalation and to confirm diagnosis and find ways to do so effectively. So has this been done before? There is one existing study, Extra, from 2012. It was a multi-center study that addressed this question, and it was conducted and led by my primary mentor, Dr. Lindberg. The study at the time recruited 20 centers, and who all endorsed a policy of doing skeletal surveys on all contacts under 2 years old. And I would like to I'm able to explain further what a skeletal survey is and how we define contacts for you. But the idea is that we wanted to work with these 20 centers that endorsed a policy of doing skeletal surveys on all contacts under 2 years of age. when the index child, so the presenting child, that had at least one serious injury and a high level of concern for abuse. So to explain what this is, if you're not in the field, a skeletal survey is a collection of more than 20 x-rays that's designed to identify occult fractures in children when there is a concern for child abuse. So you can think of it as a whole body x-ray, which is what I thought it was very basically when I first started working with Dr. Lindberg. And the American Academy of Pediatrics consider these basically mandatory for kids under 2 years of age. These guidelines are based on studies that show that skeletal surveys identified fractures about 12% of the time in index kids, but before this study, there was no recommendation for contacts. And so contacts, as we define them, are a sibling or another child that is known to share a household or a care environment with the child that is presenting. So this could be a kiddo who shares a daycare or a home and a grandparent's at the grandparent's house. So we're not looking at siblings exclusively. We're also looking at kiddos who share that same care environment. And at the time, extra data showed that about 12% of these kiddos presenting had an occult fracture, and that twins were actually at increased risk for child abuse when we looked at the data. And these are some of the papers that I would like to share with you for you to know about extra. Some of the shortcomings of extra have to do with compliance, for example. So even though the child abuse consultants at each of these 20 sites recommended skeletal surveys in almost all cases for contacts, the actual skeletal surveys were only completed about 3/4 of the time. So while extra was a crucial study for our field, it also had relatively basic methods for grouping the contacts, and say both if 2 contacts presented at the same time, neither was counted as a contact. Both were counted as index children. And I'm happy to answer any questions if this is confusing for you. The extra study was overall quite large, and the total number of included contacts was still a thin slice of the data. And the data is quite old comparatively to what we are able to do now. And we wanted to correct these errors and give an update with newer data. And that's how CAPNet came about. So CAPNet is a child abuse pediatrics network. It's relatively new. It is NIH funded, and it's dedicated to questions faced by child abuse pediatricians, and it's so important for research. So my research focuses on a data set from CAPNet. Children's Hospital Colorado and our campus here in Anschutz is one of the nodes that supervises other hospitals that are part of CAPNet. So unlike extra, this was not designed to look at a specific set of siblings and contacts. It was designed as a resource for investigators across the career spectrum to do multiple projects related to child abuse. And I cannot emphasize how crucial CAPNet is for our field and how rigorous the process of data collection and analysis is. So our database has nearly 600 variables, and the process of creating and validating these variables is quite exhaustive. So you can think of it as a very detailed database that collects de-identified information about children around the country, and these children are evaluated for suspected physical child abuse from several sites across the country. So we did learn a few things about siblings and contacts when we set up CAPNet, even if that was not the project focus. And something that CAPNet offers that extra did not is the ability to group contacts as clusters so that we are able to analyze kiddos as groups and not as individual index children. And we are also better equipped to analyze children's presenting injuries and any symptoms or examination findings that may point to occult fractures. Now about my specific project. My specific project title is Evaluating Contacts of Children Presenting for Suspected Physical Abuse, Understanding Disparities and Preventing Injuries. And my specific focus is on ethnic and racial disparities. So in Colorado, the rate of child maltreatment fatality, disproportionately affects children of color and therefore people and families of color. And as child abuse continues to be underreported and underevaluated, underdiagnosed, injury prevention efforts focus on reducing health disparities are paramount. So not only do we know that there's a highly variable practice among different centers across the country, but we also know that siblings of abused children remain at a high risk of being abused. And like I said, especially twins. And this is why previous work suggests that abuse identification and secondary prevention in contact children is not only highly variable, but so important to tackle. The objective of my project is to describe the variability and yield of occult injury testing in well-appearing contacts of children who have subspecialty evaluation, so child abuse pediatrics evaluation for suspected child physical abuse. And to this effect, I had two aims. The first aim was to determine rates of occult injury testing. So occult injury meaning an injury that you cannot see in very simple terms, in siblings and contacts nearly 10 years after the extra data were published. So how are we doing since that data was published? And our second aim is to study racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic disparities by determining whether factors such as race, ethnicity, or insurance status are predictors of testing recommendations, completion, or yield. And like the first presenter, I do not have my results to share with you because we have gathered so much data. And one of the benefits of CapNet is how exhaustive the data quality control is for us. So here are two diagrams that give you an idea of what happens when each site enters their data, how each nodal PI, so for us, that is Colorado, Children's Colorado, how we oversee other sites' data and how that data is then cleaned, validated, and stored by the central site that oversees the data entry. And that takes about 13 weeks for 1 month of encounter for that data to be ready to be utilized. But I would like to share some results with you so far, which I find them very exciting. So our data collection started in February 1st, 2021. And we have seen that we have approximately 4,000 consults in this first year. There are approximately 730 that were for contact children and around 2,400 contacts that were identified who did not have a full consultation. So this means that a kiddo may have presented with their sibling to the emergency department, but they were not seen by a child abuse pediatrician or were not evaluated with imaging. I am planning the bulk of the analysis to take place in the summer after a full year of CapNet data has undergone full quality assurance. And our first step was obviously to get the network up and running. And I think it's safe to say that we succeeded in that quite well. In terms of comparing this with extra data, with 1 year, we already have 4,000 consults that we can look at. And I think that's quite exciting as we move forward with analysis. Something that we are starting to see with the data is that even when children have a very low level of concern for abuse by an abuse specialist, they're still being reported to CPS, either before the consult was completed or for other reasons. So one of our next steps will be to look at the consequences of these reports for children and their families. And given my interests, I anticipate this will also shed light on social discrepancies around reporting. Thank you, and let me know if you have any questions.
Wonderful. Also right on time. Fantastic. Thank you. So I think what we'll do, yeah, please put your hands up if you've got any questions. I see some clapping. Super. Questions from the audience. We'll wait for them just a minute. I'm curious to know if you have thoughts on sort of, I know you're not fully done with the project yet, but already do you feel like this is impacting your sort of development as a clinician? And you think about, if you think about injury prevention in practice, is there anything you're already taking away from it in terms of what you want to do? Yeah.
100%. And I think that's why it's harder perhaps to keep an open mind in terms of enjoying other specialties. So part of our new curriculum is starting preceptorship in first year, and instead of starting clinical rotations in third year, we're starting now in second year. And so my preceptorship and a lot of my work is at Children's Emergency Department. So I work with a emergency pediatrician, and it's annoying for me at times to not have trauma be the first thing I think of. And so I think it's also part of being a medical student when you are creating your differential to think of all the possibilities, even if they're so outside the box, but just to gauge your thought process. And it's sometimes I get upset if people do not think of child abuse because they are biased in thinking this parent looks a certain way, so of course not. And so I think it's on the one hand a blessing that I have had this experience and that I'm quite certain that I will continue working in child abuse. And on the other hand, I think it's probably a bit problematic and annoying for the people around me to always hear me talk about child abuse and how we should all pay attention.
Well, I would say that is one of the joys and responsibilities about being a lover of injury prevention, is that often we can be the ones reminding those who might not be thinking about it all the time. And it's an important role. It's not annoying, it's important. So questions from the audience before we move on to our third speaker. Oh, Dr. Lindberg, yes.
I think it's probably poor form to ask a question of your mentee during a conference without giving her a heads up that you were going to ask it. So I'm going to frame this to all the other injury prevention professionals here, as well as to Dr. Batista Silverman. We're doing the traditional focus of bias and disparities, race, and payer status. That's definitely our core prospective analysis. But I'm curious to know if there are other things that people on this call think we should look at. Strangely, there's always the most consistent finding in child abuse pediatrics is that it's about a 60-40 split boys versus girls, which in the first year of life, the difference between boys and girls is pretty minor. So it's remarkable that that's continuing to go on. So we should probably look at that, and maybe things like whether they were seen at a big tertiary medical center or an outlying emergency department or things like that. But I'm curious, both to Ligia and then the other experts on the call, if there are other areas of potential bias in looking for these injuries that we should look for.
Granted, you are the expert, but to the best of my ability, I would say that's something that CAPNet offers that I'm looking forward to learn how it impacts this study specifically is something like zip code, something like insurance status. And we've also been diligent enough to collect data when it is available on identifying if a perpetrator is identified. And I think that's really fascinating as we move forward, even if that data is not collected completely a large majority of the time. But I think even if zip code is a proxy to another set of status and how we think of people, I think insurance and zip code would be two that I would put forth to answer your question.
Dr. Lee, I think we're actually going to move on just to the third, but hold the question. If we have time at the end, we'll come back to it, if that's okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. Our third presenter, who's actually a group, is Samir Andani from the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Mr. Andani is pursuing an MD, and his team includes Sarah Groover and Emily Heidemann. Their award was intended to support the creation, testing, printing, and distribution of a car sticker that reviews a driver's legal rights in the event of a traffic stop in order to make traffic law more equitable and ideally reduce police violence. Mr. Andani is a first-generation Pakistani college graduate, and his mentor is Maurice Scott, also at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you so much to the folks that are here. I'd like to introduce my team first and foremost. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Looks good.
Great. So my name is Samir. MS2 question mark. We're kind of in purgatory right now, so still trying to figure that out. Soon to be MS3. Student Dr. Heidemann, also an MS2 question mark. Student Dr. Gruber, MS2 question mark, and Dr. Marie Scott, who has been our mentor on this project, as well as a great mentor to our class. I'd also like to thank student Dr. Batista and Alin for their fantastic presentations on injury, violence, and prevention. So our aim with this project was to increase transparency about local and federal laws regarding traffic stops, as well as the citizens' rights in vehicle-related police encounters. That was our aim. Our big picture goal was to inform and empower citizens of their rights and suggested best practices during traffic stops to reduce violence. We'll get a bit more into how we accomplish this and our specific goals, but just a bit more background information. Law enforcement's use of excessive force is a matter of public health. The most common reason for contact with the police is being a driver in a traffic stop. And an interesting statistic that we found that we'll likely update in future iterations is that in 2012, an estimated 1 in 291 police stops or arrests resulted in hospital-treated injury or death of a suspect or bystander. So looking at injury and violence prevention in the scope of public services. So when we started, we aimed to answer the question, how can we increase transparency about local traffic laws while incorporating the interests of multiple stakeholders? And you can see a few of our stakeholders here, the fantastic Injury and Violence Prevention Center and the Colorado School of Public Health, as well as the ACLU of Colorado, the Aurora Police Department, and the University of South Florida, where student Dr. Heidemann is from. And then largest are the citizens of Aurora and the citizens of our community as our central stakeholder to see how we can improve their interaction with violence in the community. So our idea, and we'll get a bit more into this when Sarah presents, is the Know Your Rights car sticker. What we aim to achieve was a tool that was non-invasive, follows local laws, easily readable, and is translatable into several languages. So using concise language as well as terse language to have the most amount of information, the least amount of words that can be translated easily as well. So the way that we've worked to fulfill this goal is consulting local groups, including our stakeholders, so including the ACLU and the Aurora Police Department, who is no longer consulting on the project, given that Chief Wilson recently was let go, and also using design-oriented principles. We have some design background as a group, so incorporating design principles as well as quality initiative principles, such as rapid prototyping, PDSA cycles, and focus groups, and then framing this entire project in a lens of research and experimentation. So using our data to iterate on future parts of the project. So with that, I'll let Sarah go ahead and explain our methods.
So we have a 4-step method process: creation, testing, printing, and distribution. Let's see. We're going to go into all of these in more detail later in the presentation. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Hey, Samir. Thank you. So the stuff that we've completed to date, we have received funding from the Injury and Violence Prevention Program, which we are so grateful for. We have developed our prototype for the sticker, and we have launched our website, which you can see here. But if you wait just 1 minute, I'll have a QR code that I would love for you guys to check out. We did receive, or we did apply for IRB, and we did receive exemption for that. And then we have connected pretty extensively with the ACLU of Colorado. They are super excited about this project, and the Aurora Police Department. They also express their support. You can go to the next slide. So these are just a few examples of our prototypes. So you can see at the very beginning, we just initially just wanted to put out all the information that we wanted to include. After talking with some legal teams at ACLU and doing a little bit more research, we came up with these other 2 iterations. And then at one point, the design team at ACLU, they encouraged us to just, start from scratch, see what we could come up with. And we came up with this 4th one. I believe this one was Emily's. But then when we looked into the cost of printing color, we went back to the black and white design, which you can see on this next slide. So we went with a more horizontal. We felt that that could hold more information and keep it more visible. You can note uses of bolding. One of my favorite things about this, the most recent iteration, is how we include exact things to say. This was something that ACLU encouraged. When someone says you have the right to remain silent, or when talking about the right to remain silent, verbalizing it as I'm going to remain silent or I don't consent to searches, just to give people more tools and more empowerment like during these experiences. I would also encourage you to scan this QR code. We're using this in order to include more information for people who have this sticker. And we also are using this site to house our surveys, which Emily will go into in a little more detail. But we're using these as part of the research for our project. Yeah, we can go on to the next part. Yeah, and I believe Emily will take over here.
All right, excuse me. So I'll talk a little bit about our future directions. And you've heard that we've worked a lot with the ACLU and the Aurora Police Department. We've also had input from the Injury and Violence Prevention Center and some professors at University of South Florida, which is where I go to school. So we've had all of that input, but what we really are looking forward to next is getting input from people in the community, the people who will really be using this sticker. And to do that, we want to use focus groups. So before beginning the focus group, we'll have participants fill out a pre-questionnaire, which is it's to get how much they know about their rights during a traffic stop. So do they know that they do have the right to record, but they shouldn't try to hide that they're recording? Or do they know that they can refuse a search of their car, things like that. We'll also be asking just their general comfort level on a Likert scale. So, 1, I am extremely uncomfortable with police encounters, or 5, extremely comfortable, just to see how they feel about that. And then we'll distribute the sticker and give a basic explanation of what it is, and that these are true, and we've confirmed them with the police and different resources around Colorado, similar to the explanation you've heard today. And then we'll ask participants some open-ended questions for discussion, and I'll show those questions on the next slide. And then we're going to ask the participants to take the sticker home and use it. So for about a month, and we'll return to the same location. So it's about community centers or community colleges located in Aurora is where we're going to be targeting to hold these focus groups. And after that month, we're going to go back and see if we can find any of those same people who were in the original focus groups and ask them how it went, or if they looked at the sticker at all, how they felt. Just get any input they have for us. Participants will receive $10 in either an Amazon gift card or a gas gift card for their participation in the focus groups. And if they participate in the original focus group and then the follow-up one, that will be 2 separate gift cards. So hopefully that's some incentive to get some of that follow-up information. We know it can be pretty difficult to get. So our goal is to have 50 participants in the first focus groups, not all in one, but in multiple focus groups, and then 10 participants for a follow-up, just because we know it can be really hard to get that follow-up data or find the same people that actually use the sticker for a month. And you can go to the next slide for some of the specific questions, open-ended questions that we'll be asking about this focus group. So first, like all focus groups, we want to start with an introduction and just explain that it would be recorded, but their information will be de-identified. We wouldn't be collecting any personal information. And then some of the things that we want to know is we want to ask open-ended questions to just facilitate the discussion, but not control it. So things like, have you been pulled over? And what were your feelings when that was happening? What do you like about the sticker? What don't you like about the sticker? And then was there anything that confused you? What did you learn from the sticker? Things like that. And yeah, the goal of the focus groups would just be to let the discussion go but not get it too off course. So that's what the facilitation would be there for. And you can go to the next slide, Summer. Okay, so after we've kind of gotten some information from focus groups, and if it turns out there's a need to rework the sticker and do another iteration of the design, that would be, you know, something we would do in that time period. But if we, or when we finalize our sticker, we want to get it into the community and help as many people as possible and help people assert their rights during traffic stops. So we would go back and work with the ACLU, just like we have been throughout this whole process, and try to have them include it in their mailing at their events to get it to people in the community. But in addition to partnering with the ACLU, we have been looking at some data. So the Stanford Open Policing Project has Aurora, Colorado traffic stop data from 2012 to 2016. So it's every traffic stop. And we would analyze that to figure out the areas in Aurora where you're most likely to be pulled over, and go to community centers, community colleges, churches, grocery stores, just anywhere in those areas where we could get the sticker out to help have it the biggest impact possible. And then finally, the QR code, as you saw, is on the sticker. So every time we're handing it out, we want to continue to encourage feedback to determine if the sticker is making an impact, if it's helping people feel more confident or know what to do if they're pulled over, and then continue figuring out areas to expand and improve. And that's it. If anyone has any questions, let us know.
Fantastic work, you all. I really love the practical application, thinking about getting injury prevention really out into the community, but also certainly applying research methods to understanding it and developing it. Any questions from the audience?
I have a comment more than a question. I just love to see the development. Like, I appreciate you sharing kind of the stages that this took, because I think so often, you know, we present the final product and it's just really fun and satisfying to see the evolution.
Yeah, one piece of feedback that we got from several groups was, why are a bunch of medical students doing a design project? And framing in the lens of injury and violence prevention, we thought that, why are we not doing a project like this? So it has been really gratifying to test our creativity a bit amidst, you know, all the preclinical work that we're encountering.
Great. Alin, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you for, you know, working on this. It's not, like you just said, not very traditional for medical students to do this, which I think is about time, and thank you for paving the way for that. My question revolves a little bit more on the focus group. With some of the questions, do you have any measures to kind of help with coping for like re-traumatization? Like when asking, like, how was your experience? Why, when being stopped, like, how did you feel? How did that make you feel? Do you have, I'm sure this is probably still in the developing stage, but has there been any discussion about how to help the participants if someone was triggered?
Yeah, I can take this one. So that's a really great point. Thank you so much for bringing that up. We definitely want to make sure that participants in the focus groups are aware of the topic before coming in. We're not going to spring anything on anyone. And at any point during the focus groups, we want to make it a really safe environment. Like if anyone does feel triggered, like they are more than welcome to step out and come back at a later time, or step out and not come back. You know, it won't affect compensation, you know, anything like that. We want to be really respectful for people's experiences, and you know, we're infinitely grateful for anyone who's willing to share that with us. So thank you so much for that point.
One other thing I want to add about the design of the sticker, in accordance with Colorado law specifically, the sticker is restricted to about 4 inches wide by 2 inches tall. And the sticker itself in the white portions that you see will be transparent. However, the text will be opaque to accommodate the most amount of visibility. Now, one thing that the ACLU had brought up with us is if we want to distribute this nationally, we have to accommodate, you know, several different areas. But that's a way down the line question that we'll we'll try to confront.
And then I also do want to acknowledge our mentor, Dr. Scott. He has been awesome for just bouncing off ideas and talking us through this, doing these things. You know, it's just always great to have such a supportive mentor. So. And he is also here on this call. So thank you very much.
I have just like another curious question. Sorry, I love your project. I think like it's long overdue that something like this was done. So thank you to you all. I saw that like in the QR code that you had some of this in Spanish. Is there a plan to do focus group in Spanish or other languages?
Yeah, absolutely. Short answer. The community in Aurora is diverse, and that's kind of what makes it so great. And we want to make this as accessible as possible. So absolutely.
Thank you all. I look forward to keeping up with this.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we can wrap up. Thank you all for your projects. It's so wonderful to see your work. Let us know how we can support you as you complete these projects and as you move to the next stage of your career. Yeah, thanks again. Appreciate it.